Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Keep in mind that everything I say is completely speculative based on very little information. Let's watch.
We decided to not go to my mom's birthday party because Charlie will be there. And instead, today, we took a little family trip to the Manatee Center.
So that's great. If I were their therapist, which of course I'm not, given what I understand, I wouldn't take sides on that. I wouldn't say that they should or should not go to the mother's birthday party, but I would certainly frame this to them if they reported this to me in the following session, that it is potentially a very healthy move given their goal of trying to protect themselves and their family, their kids, from the toxicity, maybe not just with Charlie and Charlie's wife, but also maybe in the family in general. I mean, you could really, it's interesting how I think this family, Libby's family, has normalized to us, has got us thinking, or at least I'll just speak for myself, that when I think about their behavior, it is atrocious, but they do it so often that it becomes somewhat normalized. I mean, it's not like I don't see it, at least I think, and will comment on it, but it's just, imagine if your family did any one of these things, that you got into a physical altercation, that your brother-in-law drunkenly, completely humiliated you and your wife at your own wedding in your own country with your own family, that makes threats to you, that you have a sister who wishes that your husband, the father of your children, gets deported and is laughing about it in this, I don't know, it sounds politically motivated. I don't know. I'm just going to take a guess. I think I've said this before. The echo chamber that Libby's family exists in. I'm in Florida. I'm just gonna take a guess as to what is in that echo chamber. It's not like that echo chamber created xenophobia and racism and white supremacy and American exceptionalism, but the echo chamber certainly capitalizes on it to make money and create clicks and all that kind of stuff. So if my sister said something like that to me, which would be, my sister would never even come close. No one in my family would come close to saying anything along the lines of what their family has said. And that's just one of the incidents. I mean, there were threats of violence in past season and all that kind of stuff. And the just weird campaign they went on about Andrei, blah, blah, blah. If someone in my family did that once, I would seriously think about cutting myself off from them. Not because I'm trying to get revenge, but I'm just like, what is clearly you hate me or something's going on there. So see ya. So anyway, my point is that they have decided not to go to the birthday party. They could have gone as well and tried to remain differentiated, but it makes total sense, right? Not necessarily just because the chances are it probably would have gone okay at the birthday party because everyone would have been on their best behavior, including Charlie, maybe. Although Charlie was saying he was going to let Andrei have it the next time he saw him, so who knows. But the main issue is that when you're dealing with toxicity and or active addiction that is harming themselves and other people, sometimes you just have to draw a boundary, knowing that you might be cutting yourself off from 90% of neutral or good times with those people, but it's the 10% that you just cannot let in. And if you let in the 90%, the 10% comes in as well. And that's the seductive nature of these situations, is that you're like, well, Charlie isn't always bad and my family isn't always bad. And so you're like, well, maybe I can engineer it so that it doesn't go down that way. But it always ends up going down that way, or it very usually goes down that way. So, okay, they didn't go. And I feel relieved. And also, I think I'm worried about where things are headed. And at least last episode, I was like, because the pressure that the family and the siblings were putting on Libby, I was worried that they were going to head back in there, and then we were going to see this same old where Andrei is scapegoated and I'm over here getting really triggered. And so this move, at least for me personally, not as a therapist, but just as a human being who watches this and cares about these people, that maybe this is a trend of drawing boundaries in general such that we don't have to go down that road again.
După cum știu, după situația care s-a creat, este o leacă de dificultate în relațiile voastre. dar prietenie cu desila nu se face.
Exact.
Obviously, my family has had their issues for so many years, but honestly, it's never gotten to this point. And right now, it is the worst it's ever been.
Yeah, my very loose hypothesis, based on the very little little bit of information that the show presents to me, is that Andrei actually was the catalyst. I think Charlie even said Andrei was a catalyst. I think he meant it in a different way, for the family system to change in some significant ways. And it's something to, as a family therapist, as a systems thinker, it is interesting the way that family systems or any kind of human emotional system will operate. Groups of people get locked into a particular homeostasis, a pattern, and the temptation for the individuals is, and there's a lot of mechanisms in place, not only internally, but externally and behaviorally and relationally, to tell you and to convince you that this is good or it's normal or it's okay or you can never change it. And so prior to Andrei entering the family system, the family, I'm guessing, I'm just going to take a wild guess and say that their conflict and their issues and their tension and potentially addiction issues were highly present prior to Andrei even meeting Libby. So all that was there. It probably goes back generations. It often does. And they had reached a certain homeostasis, a certain pattern. There had probably been different changes and shifts over the decades, most notably the parents divorcing. That probably was a pretty big change to the system at the time. So they had eventually gotten to a place, and my hypothesis is that the kids, namely Charlie and the other two, and the three daughters, there's other kids that they haven't even included in the show from what I understand, but they had established a place where they felt stable, where the parents might not have been fighting anymore, where they had some attention from Chuck because they were working hard for him. My guess is that Chuck works a lot. Maybe he's a bit of a workaholic. Often self-employed construction folks can be that way. I don't know, obviously, but so I'm just speculating upon speculations. And then they're not getting all their needs met, but they're getting at least some more of their needs than in the past. Chuck as well. He's like feeling like things are calm. I think Chuck has a lot of traumas in his life. He comes across as someone who was really quite abused when he was young and is a pleaser. He's always trying to make everyone happy. And so the mom seems like she's got her, we don't have a lot of data on her, but anyway, I think they had a homeostasis, a stability with problems in all likelihood, and lack of real closeness, lack of developmental, maturity and differentiation, but it was working for the most part. Andrei comes in and throws the whole system off. Everyone has to adjust to Andrei because he's not only with Libby, but he's also entering into the family business. And I think that's when the threat really was felt by the family. Everyone in the family is like, whoa, now what do we do? We had all eked out our little place. It's, if I was to, give it some sort of visual analogy, imagine that you are a cook. If you're familiar with chefs and in high pressure kitchens, you're one of those, Gordon Ramsay kinds of kitchens. And if you have any experience with that, I had a friend that was in one of those kitchens, and she told me all about that whole thing. And the things that I learned was that each cook, each chef has their own role and their own station and there's a hierarchy. And when you work it out so that everyone knows what the other people are going to do and you kind of know what your job is, and you absolutely depend on everyone to do their job and people depend on you, and when everything's working well, everything works well, not without its costs and its problems, but you end up getting the job done. And you end up meeting each other's needs, hey, I need this thing. And, so apply that to a family system. And then there's a new chef, the restaurant is growing, and you just throw in this new chef. And the system of the kitchen, they didn't decide who that person was because, the rest of the family did not vet Andrei. So they feel like they're, it's foisted onto them, right? And so now in the kitchen, suddenly you have this new person that doesn't know what they're doing, but is trying to do everyone's job. You just imagine that there would be a lot of grumbling, a lot of fear, a lot of anger, a lot of bullying of that new person, potentially if there isn't good leadership and lack of differentiation. So in a much bigger way, that's possibly what happened when Andrei entered. And so then because of their development and their lack of differentiation, they just said, we are all going to get rid of him. Whether we know that consciously or not, that's basically what we're going to be doing. It'll be an unspoken rule, or maybe even literally they had conversations behind the scenes. They said, we are going to get rid of him. He is, he's doomed because we're strong as a group of people. They went after him. Andrei stood up for himself. Libby and their relationship was a lot stronger than I think they thought. Also, Chuck and Andrei's bond was not predicted by them. And then everything started to topple, right? If we apply it to the kitchen, you might have half of the kitchen is saying, we want to quit, that kind of thing. And then everything gets out of whack. Much more anxiety, much less of the kitchen working very well. Plates are being uncooked. Customers are coming in and walking. There's bad reviews in the newspaper. The owner is coming in and saying, what's wrong with you people? There's a fire that goes off in one of the stoves because no one's paying attention. Real crises and a lot of anxiety, a lot of pain, and everyone's just trying to get their job done. And they just want it to go back to the way it was when Andrei wasn't around. And so the introduction of Andrei exposed the lack of differentiation, the massive amounts of anxiety, the lack of maturity, the lack of real connection in the family. And all they wanted was for it to go back to the way it was. And so they whatever they needed to do in terms of mental gymnastics and bullying, they were going to do to get rid of Andrei.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't want that,
We're not a problem, babe.
We were always so close-knit, but the older I get, the more I realize of all the issues and how it really affects me.
Right. Now, I want to be clear that I am speculating on very little information. I know enough about family systems or any kind of human system to know that if I actually was able to assess the family system, I would have much more to say and much more confident things to say. So, just keep that in mind. Now, she's saying we were very close-knit, and now she's like, I don't really know. And you'll hear that from people that are in enmeshed relationships. I don't know about her, but it's very indicative of that when you have a family that's enmeshed, and I have a lot of audio episodes about enmeshment, you can just search for that on my website or the channel and find episodes on that. And so when you have enmeshment, and I've talked about this before with this family, and so I won't go into full detail because I think this is review, is that it feels close. The people convince themselves they're close, and there is a sort of closeness, but really it's forced closeness. There's a lot of guilt tripping that happens in order to keep people from doing anything divergent from the rules, because the family system, sometimes dictated from the top, maybe the mom engineered this, not sure, that in order for people to be less anxious, they need to be able to predict the future, and then they need to, at any time anyone is different or steps outside of that enmeshment, everyone gets anxious because they're worried they're going to lose that person, because they might even have precedent, maybe the divorce, that points in that direction, that unless we completely clamp down both externally on people and internally, meaning everyone internally forces themselves through guilt tripping or whatever to enmesh, then we'll just fly apart. That's the worry, is like if we don't completely enmesh, we will fly apart. That's false, of course, because there's a balance there that you can actually be very close with flexibility, where you're choosing to be close and not actually forced emotionally to be close, right? And like I said, there is some element of closeness, but it can be often, you will often trick yourself when you're in an enmeshed relationship, particularly maybe if you're the youngest, because you're indoctrinated early as a young person into that system that's already established some stability. I don't know. And you're like, yeah, we're close. In fact, a lot of enmeshed families that have a lot of problems will actually think of themselves as superior to other families because they will see other families not being so close, or they'll hear about someone not coming to a birthday party, or they'll hear about someone that they haven't had a chance to talk with their brother in a while, and they'll be like, well, we're better, we're different. And that's all part of the structure to superiorize themselves, because they need to convince themselves and convince each other to stay together because of everyone's anxiety. And so when one or more members starts to emerge from that, which I think Andrei is allowing Libby to start questioning all these things. And I think Libby also has a little bit more differentiation and maturity to be able to do that anyway. But without Andrei, I think we'd be hard pressed to imagine that she would actually be able to get to this point. Not that he's the one that's engineering it, but by him being around and by everyone bullying him, she's like, wait, so these are the people that are quote unquote close to me? I always thought you loved me for me. I always thought you were close to me because of me. Now I'm realizing you only love me or are close to me because you want me to follow your rules or be like you or something. And as soon as there's any kind of problem, like, we're garbage to you. So I must have always been garbage to you, you know, and it's a very hurtful thing to realize. And so she, you know, she's starting to look at that, and you'll often hear these statements from people. They'll be like, I always thought we were really close, but now that I'm seeing the true colors of this family system, I'm wondering, were we ever actually close? So she's, I think, exhibiting that.
You know, when I think of my family, I think of a very loud, crazy concert. Like, you can't hear yourself. You can't hear your inner thoughts. And so it brought a lot of negativity in my life.
So that's very telling, actually. That's very indicative of enmeshment, that you cannot hear yourself. Interesting that she's bringing it to like a concert or music or something, but yeah, that's what enmeshment will do, is you think you're thinking for yourself, but you're actually not. You're thinking for the collective. And everyone is doing this, by the way. It's not just imposed on one person. Like, everyone gives up the self for the sake of the togetherness, for the sake of the system, because they're trying to retain their closeness. They're trying to retain, you know, people don't enmesh because they just want to be jerk faces. They're doing it out of anxiety. And when I work with enmeshed families, I'll tell you, it is difficult. I learned this early in my career because, you know, I'm originally trained as a systems thinker, a family therapist. And so when I came across my first quintessential enmeshed family, I was like, ooh, this is what all the books are talking about. And then I went on a campaign to convince the family of such. And it took a while, but they eventually were like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. And they agreed with me. And then I thought, okay, job done. Now they'll just change. No. With awareness, that was like 5% of the battle. I mean, often knowing is half the battle, as G.I. Joe would say, but in this instance, it's not. The internal and relational battles that have to occur in order to really change, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to change the system from enmeshed, fake close, to actually close and healthy and flexible. And basically, you have to make everyone in the family securely attached enough such that when one member of the family diverges from the family enmeshment, you and everyone in the family do not feel unhealthy amounts of anxiety and resort to behaviors to guilt trip the person or shame the person back to compliance. Truly healthy, close families, if Libby wanted to be with Andrei, even if that didn't fit with the family system's narrative of themselves or their values, or even if they didn't even really like Andrei, a truly healthy, loving, close family, unconditional love, they would still love Libby. They would still care for her. They would still have empathy for her. They wouldn't try to get rid of Andrei. They wouldn't try to punish Chuck for even just considering hiring Andrei. You know what I mean? That punishment, that you are breaking the rules. You cannot do that. And deep down, in all likelihood, or at least in families that I've treated, they have this delusional distortion that if Chuck hires Andrei, I, myself, will not get the love and attention that I need. Because I know what that feels like, because I've had that experience in the past. And so I need everyone to follow the rules and do nothing divergent from that, because I'm terrified of change, essentially. And so you give up the self. This is something that you do actually internally. It's often subconscious, right? But you learn subtly through interactions in the family, starting very young, that when you diverge into yourself, when you actually have your own thoughts or have feelings that are maybe not quite acceptable in the family, you learn through subtle messages and subtle behaviors that that is not safe. As an example, let's say that as a 7-year-old, you think, little Libby as well, I guess we'll say that she wanted to be a singer at some point, right? And for whatever reason, the family probably saw that as diverging from the family. You have to be working for Chuck, or you have to do something that's in our echo chamber, I don't know, whatever, something capitalistic probably. But anyway, they're like, that diverges, and because it diverges, we have a delusional amount of anxiety that says that that's going, and this is all subconscious, that's going to cause everyone to fly apart. And so everyone in the family, although not explicitly saying to Libby that she can't be a singer or that that's stupid, although that might have been said, they might subtly not encourage her. They might put her down or go like, well, there's no money in it, and why don't you do this other thing? All these subtle little behaviors, and then over time, enough of these diverging things emerge in a child or a member of the family that you realize this is registers often subconsciously, that if I do something that isn't vetted by my internal editing machine to be of this family, of this system, then bad things are going to happen to me. I'm going to get rejected. I'm going to get made fun of. And it's so much easier to just slot in and do what everyone else expects me to do. And so all this is happening in the background. But if you asked Libby 5 years ago, do you think for yourself? She'd be like, yeah, I totally think for myself. And could you do whatever you want to with your career? Yeah, absolutely. But as she's now emerging, she's starting to think, well, I don't know if that was always true. I'm now starting to realize all these other thoughts are coming back to me. And when I work with clients like this, it's really a magical time. Now, I don't want to give the impression that somehow when I'm working with the Libbys of the world that I'm just like, you need to reject your family, because that's actually not my thing. I'm not big on that. I like family. I like to salvage clients' family relationships as much as they can within reason. So it's not about that, but it is about who am I and how do I feel? What do I want? Now, sometimes those things are conflictual with life or family, and sometimes we can't act on those things, but at the very least, we're allowed to have those thoughts. We're allowed to think them. We're allowed to feel them and consider them in a way that is fair to us. And I think she's at that point, which is, I'm really happy for her.
And it does affect people. Like, you can't just patch things up and move on. Let's enjoy this. Let's not spoil it.
And so the pressures is the choice that she has to make is I either choose myself, which I'm really not used to doing, and go into a world that I feel is very scary and maybe lonely, or I give up myself and I get to retain normalcy and relationships and acceptance. Because that's the other thing is, I don't know about Libby, but I wonder about her siblings if they're still struggling with acceptance. They're still they haven't received enough acceptance from their parents, and so they're still seeking that by continuing to grasp for approval in various different ways. But anyway, so it's a very difficult choice, and it's hard to navigate, right? Because it's easy for us to look at Libby and just be like, yeah, get rid of him. But, it's your family. And I know a lot of you might be able to relate to this, that even if you have a toxic family member, it's still your family member. And you can't just give up on them. Now, can you give up on them? Yes. People will email or comment, be like, is it okay if I completely cut myself off from my abusive mother? And I'll say, like, yes. I mean, it's up to you, but because there are notions in culture and various cultures around the world that somehow 100% of the time you can never do that to your parents. But that denies the reality that some parents are massively abusive and toxic and absolutely an overall negative in someone's life. All right, that does it for that episode. We have a website, naturally, but it's not just like a pointless website. There's a lot of things on there that can be very helpful. We organize things. There's pictures. There's a lot of content on the website that can be fun to check out. We have our whole charitable donation page with all of our scholarship people and our art grant people, and we have a photos page with a lot of archived photos from the podcast going back 14 years. Anyway, you can, visit that if you want to. We also have an audio podcast on. If you haven't subscribed to the audio podcast on your phone, you can subscribe on your phone, and it'll automatically download every episode that we publish. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.